take off, take flight with you. For we never fly, but we're flying.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Take Flight Takeaways. This is episode number 88. And the whole idea of a Take Flight Takeaway is that one of the Take Flight members will spend about 10 minutes just talking a little bit about a topic that's on their mind, and they want to share some sort of learning, insights, and takeaways for you. So in today's topic, I actually want to spend a little bit of time talking about a discussion and a debate that is quite common in society today. And it's around your 9 to 5, your 9 to 5 job, whether you should quit it, whether you should keep it. And I'm taking more of an angle as to provide more insights as to how your 9 to 5 can help you versus hinder you, right? I think there are 1,001 voices out there in the market today that push the narrative of quitting your 9 to 5, working for yourself. And I think unless it's put into its proper context, I think it can actually I think it can cause more frustration than it needs to. I think actually it can cause a reverse effect, and people are sometimes left with not really knowing what to do. So I'm just really wanting to provide some perspectives and maybe provide a bit more perspective on the other side, because I think we've heard enough of sort of reasons as to why maybe you should quit your 9 to 5. So before I continue, just want to provide the listeners with my position. So I've been working for a multinational company that does 50 billion in sales for the last sort of 9 years. And also, if you've been listening to the podcast, you know I also do a number of other things on the side as well. So that's me coming in. I'm not the entrepreneur. I'm more the 9 to 5er. So I'll give you some perspectives there. So just getting into it. So I think these are things I want you to keep in mind, right? And I think I'm speaking to someone now who is potentially working and is in their 9 to 5. They're not too sure whether they should quit or stay, and they're listening to all these different pieces of information, and they're actually kind of stuck and paralyzed. So let me give you some things to think about. I think the very first thing that I'll say, and it's important to mention because I don't think it's mentioned enough, is that it's not for everyone, right? Working for yourself is not for everyone. And I'll come on to later as to some of the things you need to keep in mind when working for yourself. And in order to have a thriving economy, because that's something we need to consider and keep in mind, you need to have both great employees that provide value, plus also people that are interested and want to go into build businesses. So you need the two. You can't just have a pool of people that want to build businesses and nobody that wants to work in pushing those businesses. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing to keep in mind, or these are just a list of items, is please keep in mind that not all 9 to 5s are created equally. Right. So the experience that you get from working for a multinational billion-dollar company or a multi-million-dollar company or a million-dollar company is very different experience than what you'd get working for a very small local boutique business in your local neighborhood. So when that narrative is pushed around quit your 9 to 5, it doesn't actually speak to which kind of 9 to 5 do you actually have, right? And so you need to understand sort of where you are, because I think there are opportunities at both ends of the spectrum, and you can't just paint, I think, that the advice with just one brush. Please keep in mind that if you look, I want you to look at it like this. When you're working in a company, you're actually getting paid to develop your skills. Think about it. I know we talk a lot about trading time for money, and whilst that's very true, look at it in this way. You are getting paid every day to turn up, to come into an environment to develop skills. So if you think about it, it's a great opportunity to develop yourself, right? The second thing is you have an opportunity to build a fantastic network, a network at which you can then port at a later stage in your career to items that you may want to do outside or within your career, right? Developing your career within the job, within your company, requires you to have a good network. So, again, I keep going back to that point. When we talk about quitting your 9 to 5 to go work for yourself, these are the things that I don't think are put on the table and considered in terms of weighing up. I think the other thing you want to keep in mind and consider, it's all about where do you create the most amount of value, right? Do you create more value if you was to actually work for yourself, or would you create even more value working in teams that have been assembled by companies? And I think ultimately we want to be in a world where people are creating they're going where they can create the most value. Where can you have the most amount of impact? If it's in your 9 to 5, if it's in your job, then you should do that very well. And you should actually look to see how you continue to sort of build your career in that space. Another thing to keep in mind is that your job where you are now can provide a perfect platform for you to build the right blocks to eventually go on to build your own enterprise, right? So sometimes a lot of us are impatient and want to quit, when actual fact we're actually in a position that is allowing us and providing us an opportunity to get there. We just have to change our perspective and look at it a little bit differently, right? So the income you receive from your 9 to 5 can actually start to fund something that you want to do on the outside. And if you also think about it, it's actually a very low risk, because every single month you're going to get paid again, and which you can continue to fund your idea. So you have an opportunity to sit and learn, build skills, plus do something on the side whilst getting paid in order to do this. The other thing also I want you to keep in mind, another perspective, is that when we talk about the idea of quitting a 9 to 5 and working for yourself, it's always with this notion of, being number one. There are so many benefits behind drafting behind the number and being a number two and drafting behind a number one, right? So a lot of times we want to be your own boss. That's the narrative that's pushed, which means you're now standing by yourself and you're being number one. But we don't necessarily talk about how much can come out of learning from being number two for quite some time before then you potentially may want to be number one, right? So sometimes the rush and the need to quit needs to be properly validated, because I think you don't want to make the wrong decision and you're missing out on all the opportunities that I'm actually talking about now. So the other thing also I want to say, I maybe come back to it, is going back to that point around not all 9 to 5s are created equally, right? Now, I think people tend to just take the notion that it's, I don't know, working for McDonald's or it's working behind a desk. The way I see it, a 9 to 5, you could be working for a startup, and that is a 9 to 5, exciting, thriving, and business is building, right? So I think we need to start also taking a very matured way of looking at how we take this discussion forward, because it's not just working behind a desk or with someone in a very, very small company. It's really, there's different types of businesses that are out there. The other thing I also want to say is, I don't have the data and facts behind this, but one thing I will say actually is that the 9 to 5s have created so many millionaires and multimillionaires. And people don't talk about that, because a lot of times people say, I'm going to quit my 9 to 5 because I want to make more money working for myself. Whilst that's true and that also can happen, please don't forget that I spend a lot of time. In the 9 years that I've been with this company, I've networked and spoken to a lot of people who are actually millionaires and multimillionaires, right? And they've all generated that wealth from a 9 to 5 position. But that's something that's not discussed enough, right? Because you get into you can get into sort of stock options, and you can get into your bonuses, and then how you can start to use that. So we talk about in 9 to 5, it's just the income I get each month. It doesn't move. In actual fact, there are other ways to actually earn and create wealth in your 9 to 5 position. But are you looking at it with that perspective, right? So that's something to pay attention to. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind when working for yourself, because if anyone's gonna push the narrative of quitting a 9 to 5, then please also provide these points for people to keep in mind. The very first thing is, if you're going to quit your 9 to 5 to work for yourself, remember, whilst you may have leaned in with the idea of, I don't want to work for someone, or I don't want to have a boss. Newsflash for you: when you're working for yourself, you are now your own boss. So you have to learn how to boss yourself around, which is something that perhaps you may not be the best at doing, and it's a very uncomfortable space to be in for the beginning. Now, someone may say, well, actually, I can get used to that. Well, second thing to that is, you may not have a boss in a traditional 9 to 5 setting, but now as an investor or as an entrepreneur, you've got a different form of boss, and I can tell you what that looks like. If you're a property investor, your tenants are now your boss. If you don't serve them well, they will leave. You don't get paid. You don't have a business. If you're an entrepreneur, your customers are now your boss. If you don't serve them well or provide great customer satisfaction or lean in with that first, you don't have a business. If you're an investor raising finance, your investors are your boss. So it goes back to that point around, let's start to be mature about how we have this conversation as to whether it's about a 9 to 5 or working for yourself. And it's not black and white, right? There are many different variables and factors to take in mind and consider. Now, having said all of that, there are some watch outs. There are some watch outs if you are in a 9 to 5 And these, I would say, are non-negotiables. And this is why I think a lot of the frustration is coming from in people wanting to say, look, I want to work for myself. And it's totally plausible, and I totally understand. The very first thing, and this is what I think people need to start paying attention to. So a couple of things. If you like everything that I've said about what you can get from your 9 to 5, that's great. Take that into consideration, but you must ensure that the things I'm about to say next, you also sort of meet as a criteria. The very first thing, we need to stop chasing titles and start chasing who we work under, right? And start chasing what skill set we can develop and what development plan. And this is a very important thing, because when you look at whether it's a 9 to 5 or working as an entrepreneur, you're really talking about the experience that you want to create for yourself along this journey. And the best way to create the best experience in working for a company is working under the right person who can develop you in the right way. If you work under the wrong person, I would say that's a non-negotiable. You should look for a new role. You should look for a new company. You should look for a new option. The second thing I'd probably talk about, which can actually help to bring more joy and less frustration in working for a company, is try to work for a company where they actually produce a tangible product, something you can touch, feel, you can see, and something you're actually maybe quite passionate about. You're passionate about the mission statement. You're passionate about what they're actually trying to do and serve in the marketplace. I think the frustration in a lot of people as to why they want to quit the 9 to 5 is because, one, they've landed in an industry and a job that they're just there to really get paid, right? So they're in that, they actually feel they're in the rut of just trading their time for money. And I understand why they're looking for different options. They're working under the wrong person, so they're not getting developed. So year on year, they just feel like they're flatlining. And I think ultimately there's no connection between them and actually what is being sold. So actually you're just turning up, you log in, you do a job, you leave at 5 o'clock and you go. And that's not, nobody wants to be in that situation or have that kind of experience. So some points I just want some of you guys to keep in mind who are in that space of thinking what it is that you want to do. Now, I come to a conclusion. This is what I think, and this is my take, my insights, and based on what I think and based on what I felt over my experience. I think it's not about whether it's a 9 to 5 or whether it's about whether you work as an entrepreneur or an investor. I think for a lot of people that are listening to this, that this may resonate. What it comes down to is, do you have a plan? And I think a lot of the frustration and a lot of the reasons as to why the idea of quitting your 9 to 5 sounds good is because you don't have a plan. Because and let me explain to why I say that. Your plan could actually entail working in the 9 to 5 for a certain amount of years to then take the things I've mentioned, the network, the skill set, the wealth that you've created, the income you've paid yourself first, to then go and actually build your own enterprise. But you wouldn't have got to that stage unless you'd leverage your 9 to 5 in a very great way, right? Then also keep in mind, there are many people that go from being an entrepreneur, being an investor or working for themselves to then working into a 9 to 5 situation, because actually what they want to do is take their experiences, take their skill set that they've developed. Let's take, for example, a trader, someone that's been trading from home for a number of years. They now actually want to move into maybe more of a investment banking space and start to co-create with employees, start to co-create with other people, right? So I think it's all about the plan. I think it's about having a plan, and I think it's about understanding where you're going to create the most of that impact, right? So these are the things I actually want you to sort of keep in mind. Start to take more of a matured approach to this sort of discussion. And I will end by also saying that I totally get the point around, working in one position or one company to the age of 65 and not being able to get anything out of that, right? So that is something, yes, I totally get, but it's about building great experiences, going where you have the most amount of value, and you can interchange along your career, right? And actually then go out and actually provide value that wasn't already there before. So that's just a few points around this whole, topic and discussion. That's not going to go away. That will always be there, around whether you should quit your 9 to 5, whether you should stay, if you're frustrated, what to keep in mind. I hope some of those points help to provide a perspective. And I'll look forward to some engagement. If you've got any thoughts, questions, or points, or you want to chime in with your opinion, please do that on our Take Flight podcast on Instagram. And if you've got any questions, you can always email us at takeflightpodcast@gmail.com. My name's been Pabilo Timbo. It's been great to be able to share some of these insights with you, and look forward to engaging with you on the next episode.
Take off,